Today I'm going to rank every single Animorphs book. 64 books I'm here to rank. I've got my list, I've done it, and I'm going to show you what my ranking is. A few disclaimers before I start. I'm not including the Animorphs Meet the Stars book because it's completely non-canon and it's relevant to the TV series. I didn't want to mix it in with the actual book series. So Animorphs Meet the Stars is not part of this. The Alternamorphs and the additional side books are included, which brings the number up to 64. What other disclaimers? Oh yeah, because apparently whenever anyone does these lists, they start off by saying this, so I get the feeling that I'm supposed to because people obviously don't get it. These are my opinions. I really don't think I should be patronising you by saying that, but this is the internet and there are people that don't understand that apparently. These are my opinions. If you don't like them, then have your own. Here, opinions. Mould them to your own will. There, have them. Right, I'm going to keep mine, and I'm going to show you them now. And there will be some controversial picks in here, so be ready. If you've seen my Animorphs review series, you might already have an idea how some of this is going to go. Right, so there are going to be two prizes in this. So there's going to be the winner, which is going to go up here in front of this Animorphs box, top of the shelf. And then there is going to be the Honda Jazz prize. I've even got a little Honda Jazz here. The Honda Jazz Worst Book prize. So the book that ranks 64th will be going here, behind the little Honda Jazz, just to show how crap it is. So, without further ado, let's rank 64 Animorphs books in order. This took me a while, but by golly gosh gee, I've done it, haven't I? Yeah? Pebble agrees with me. Right, so number 64. You might already have guessed this, the weakness. Every single page of this is wrong. Every single bloody page. I was close to ripping what little remained of my hair out of my skull. This was just... I can't even... You can tell by the condition of the book how I felt after reading it. I have sellotaped it back together. It's still in my collection. Are you judging me?
Yes.
Why are you judging me?
Because you ripped the book.
I ripped the book, yes. But it deserved it. It really was utter tripe. And that gets the Honda Jazz Award for Worst Book of the Series. You stay there. Tch, I spit on you. Maybe that's a bit extreme. So, number 63. We've already gotten one Rachel book out of the way. We're going to get another one out of the way. The Journey, the second Helmicron book. It's book 42. Now, there are a lot of problems with this book, very similar to the last one, in which practically every page had something wrong with it. There was not very much right about this book at all. Not only that, but it just came at the wrong place in the series. There are a lot of times where you got a funny book, basically a filler book, but it was relatively well placed, like book 24, The Suspicion. After a long line of really hard-hitting books, The Suspicion came at the right place, right time, and it was quite funny when it needs to be. This one came at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and quite frankly, it wasn't very funny. Which is... One Helmicron book is enough, let's say that. But the only thing that puts this above book 37, the lowest ranked book in the series, is the fact that it knows it's crap. At least it knows, and it plays off of that. Whereas book 37 not only was crap, but also took itself relatively seriously. So, this is book 63, not great. Number 62, Alternamorphs 1, The First Journey. This is a very glary book. I'm always blinding myself just looking in the camera view there. This is non-canon. Completely non-canon and entirely unnecessary. And the what little fun there is in it wears off very quickly. It's a difficult one to get through, but it's not entirely offensive. It just doesn't belong. It doesn't belong anywhere. So that's number 62. 61, probably one of my more controversial picks here. 61 is book 33, The Illusion, the third Tobias book. And a lot of people like this one. Why? I really don't know. I really don't know. The plot is a complete mess. where not really much makes sense. The characters are out of character. It introduces the worst character of the series, without doubt for me, which is Taylor. Awful, awful villain. And the entire latter two-thirds of the book is Tobias getting tortured, where we could have learnt stuff. We really could have, but we didn't. We just rehashed stuff we already knew. And that's it. It really is just a nothing book. The only saving grace is that it sets up stuff in book 43. That's it. That's really the only positive that happens in this book. It really is a waste of potential, and because of that, it ranks this low in the ranking. The Absolute. Remember, these are double books, but it's the one with Marco morphing into the Mallard on it. One of the latter books in the series, it really should have had more impact than it eventually did. Looking back at it now, the actions and the plot points that took place in The Absolute didn't really do anything. It is as close to filler as the latter books come. And not only that, it is just set-piece action rubbish. Much like the second part of the Like Chronicles, there really isn't much substance to it. I thought this would round off Marco's character because he'd gone a bit wayward in his character development recently. But there was no development. It didn't finish off Marco's story at all. Again, another completely wasted opportunity, wasted book, practically filler. And we're at the very last stages of the series. We shouldn't have any filler. One of the big guilty parts of this book. So, The Absolute. Absolute garbage. Next up, the lowest ranked book by the original author, Catherine Applegate, book 17, another Rachel book. This one was completely out of place in terms of quality. Back when I reviewed it, I said, what the hell what was Catherine doing at the time? Was she just off her face on something for this month? Because out of nowhere, we get such a shoddy book in amongst a crowd of really good books. Number 17 was a complete mess. A complete mess. Just nothing made sense. There was no logic thrown in. The message that it tried to get across had been covered in the last two books and was covered in this one really poorly. And it tried to be funny when it really shouldn't have been, when it should have been more serious. It was just a complete cluster. Number 58, probably another controversial choice, The Revelation, book 45. What feels like, after reading the whole series, the final book of Marco's character arc. How does it finish? I really don't know. The worst part of this book is that it takes one of those moments that I've been waiting for so long, the reveal to the first parent, and just completely skips by it. That's basically unforgivable. And it also includes probably the worst Deus Ex Machina in the whole series, where Jake somehow manages to hide a bug fighter inside the pool, the Yerk ball, until just the right moment to attack Visser 3. Really was a letdown of a book. This was the start of the ramping up to the end of the series, and it just completely fell on its face. A complete disaster of a book. Number 57 is another by Catherine Applegate. It is The Separation, and it was originally said that it was ghostwritten, but it had been screwed up so much that Catherine had to step in and write it herself. Maybe that's the reason it really doesn't pay off. Up to this point, Rachel's character was at least somewhat interesting, but this one completely destroyed her character, and it only recovered at the very end. For a few books after this one, Rachel's character, in my opinion, had been completely destroyed because of this book. It's not very often a single book in the series ruins a character, especially one of the main ones. But turning Rachel into nothing more than just nice and mean Rachel really didn't pay off. I think I see what she was going for, but I wasn't a great fan. It had its moments, this book. It wasn't completely awful, but it is certainly low in the pile. One of the shorter books in the series, but certainly felt like one of the longest, is The Hidden. This one comes in at number 56 on the list, and it's the buffer human one. Yes, the one where a buffalo gets the power to morph, and an ant does so as well. The biggest problem with this book, the biggest problem, is that it just completely does away with everything we know about this thing. One of the most important items in the story, the morphing cube. This book just says, no, we're just going to invent new rules for it. Which in a series like this, and so late in the series, book 39, is pretty unforgivable. But this moment does have its good moments. We're starting to get into the books now where they have some redeeming features, and this one revolves largely around just showing what Cassie's like, where she's constantly just chasing, trying to keep up, but never quite managing it. So it had its good moments, but the destruction of the morphing cube technology, yeah, you're a low scorer, I'm sorry to say. Number 55 on the list, following on immediately from 39, is book 40, The Other. This one was frustrating. Firstly, it's basically filler. It doesn't play anything into the rest of the series. And secondly, one of the biggest problems of this is Jake, because he's confronted with an Andalite who has straight up said to him, I'm willing to give you to the Yeerks to protect myself and my friend. And Jake is just like, okay, how can we help? And you, throughout the rest of the series, put into context, that just doesn't make sense for Jake or the rest of the Animorphs. Complete naivety that was misplaced. It would may have been better at the start of the series, and of course we never see Gefandelan or Myrtle again. So a very odd book that doesn't really play into anything and was very infuriating at times. It's low on this list. Number 54, The Diversion, the one with Tobias morphing into the Alsatian, the one where he saves Lauren. I rated this one quite low when I did the review, and I'm now trying to think about why I didn't like it so much. And that's part of the problem with this book. I only read it recently. It's one of the latter books of the series. It's in the build-up to the very end, and I'm just looking at it like, what happened here? I mean, I know that they got their parents out, but that's really it, and there was a granny in a helicopter. But for what should have been a really big book, it really isn't. It really isn't. I just look at it and think, oh, I suppose it was a book in the series. It should have been better than it was. Not awful, but yeah, it should have been better. This might surprise a few of you, and you're probably wondering where it is. Ranked number 53 on the list, Alternamorphs 2, The Next Passage. This is a very strange one, and it actually intrigued me, which is why it's ranked a little higher on this list, because depending on how you look at it, it could be considered canon. In almost like a David prequel, because the character you're playing in this is, no mistaking, David, before what happened in book 20. And there's a load of time stuff going on in the background, which we're used to in the Animorphs series, so it could theoretically be canon, and it has a lot of interesting things in it if you take it from that perspective. And because of that intrigue, that interest, I rather enjoyed it. It wasn't great, and the formula is still somewhat frustrating, but yeah, you're not bad, The Next Passage. You're certainly the better of the two Alternamorphs books. No contest there. Not too bad. Possibly another controversial pick. Book 50, or rank 52, is book 29, The Sickness. The one with Cassie morphing the Yeerk on the front. Now, the major points of this book were pretty good, relatively entertaining. The big problem with this one, the massive, massive problem that's really brought this book down, is the fact that the plot makes no sense. Absolutely, not even with within the context of the book itself. This just doesn't make sense. And then Cassie being able to perform brain surgery on an alien at the end. The only way I can forgive that is if one of my little conspiracy theories ends up being proven correct, which is that Cassie is part of the Elemis. Much like when he went to the Andalite world and started their little civilization off, or started it rolling forward. Unless that's true, then this plot just makes no sense, and it's just weird and bizarre. Yeah, the plots, the stuff that goes on in it, fine. It's not great, but it's all right. The plot, bad. And coming in at number 51, this is probably the one that's going to get me crucified by certain members of the Animorphs fan community. Coming in at number 51, The Like Chronicles. The most overrated book in the series.
What? You're joking, right?
See what I mean?
That's one of my favorites. That's one of my top 5.
It's dross.
You just don't appreciate Andalite culture. It's fine.
I know bringing us to Britain would come with consequences. Women! Get back to doing the food.
Don't forget, I'm making your dinner right now.
Love you.
Huh.
Right, let's do this quietly so she doesn't hear. This book is dramatically overrated. The first third was very good. The latter third, the third part of it, was average. The middle part, Alaran's Choice, was a steaming lump of fecal matter, if I could put it politely. The Like Chronicles was more
Brilliant.
bark than bite. Kicking off again. I might just put this book down now to save from further woman consequences. But yeah, rank number 51, The Like Chronicles. I'm going to put it down. Now into the top 50, and at 50 is book 46, The Deception. This one started off very well, but as the book progressed, it went slowly downhill, and by the end, it read very much like book 37, the Honda Jazz winning book. But that start it brings it back up a bit, and also the bit at the very end where Axe betrays Jake it really adds to the latter part of the series, and it carries on through, and that was a really crucial part. So this book does play its role in the series. For all of its flaws and frustrating bits, it does its job. Book 49, or ranked number 49, is book 15, The Escape. This is the one where Marco goes down and finds his mother again in the underground water base, and we come across the Lyrans. But apart from that, it's just a pretty run-of-the-mill Animorphs book. It's not that memorable. I'm sure a lot of you might agree with me. It's just missing something. It's not very memorable at all. That's all I've really got to say for it. Ranked number 48, Megamorphs 1, The Andalite's Gift. It was relatively fun, but very much like The Escape, it was largely forgettable. I think I'm at that sort of stage in the ranking where we're past the books that are just bad, and we're now at the books that are just bland, average, and forgettable. So that's where we are at the moment. And The Andalite's Gift, as I said at the time of reading it, was just the authors messing around. You know, they've put all these characters out there, and now they thought, oh, let's just put them into the situation we want to put them in. It became The Andalite's Gift, and yeah, it didn't really play anything to the series. The first half was awful. Second half brought it back, but yeah, a bit bland. At number 47 is book 27, The Exposed, another Rachel book, and this is where we meet a few more of the Chi, like Lowards, or Lords, however you pronounce her name. And this also introduces the Drode. The big plus of this book is it gives us that introduction into Rachel's final arc before she got ruined in book 32. And it came back in book 48, The Return. So it just adds a little bit to that story. Apart from that, there really isn't that much to this book, and it's just another example of the Chi being traitorous bastards. So yeah, another relatively forgettable book. Rank number 46 is book 7, The Stranger. This one actually introduces the Elemis, so it is a very important book in the series. It's very early on in the series as well, and you get some pretty good scenes in there. But the character stuff in the background with Rachel choosing between her father and her mother, it just didn't feel quite right or properly thought out, and we never truly see the consequences of that again. And the Elemis stuff, as much as he was an important character to introduce, it just didn't really grab me that much. So again, it's one of those books that had a bit of potential, but I just don't think it paid off as well as it could have. Rank number 45, book 35, The Proposal. This is basically a carbon copy of book 12, The Reaction. In fact, if you were to put the summary of those books side by side, you probably wouldn't know which one's which, and for that reason I marked this book quite low down. But it does have its good moments. It can be quite amusing when it wants to be. You get the lead into the Visser Chronicles book, and this book has one of my favourite scenes in the entire series where Jake chastises Cassie in the final battle sequence. So yeah, it's flawed, but it has some really good moments in it. And so it doesn't rank too low in my list. And also you get Euclid the Poodle. I mean, who's going to forget that character ever? Honestly. Speaking of The Reaction, it comes in at rank 44 on the list. Yeah, it's basically the same book as The Proposal, so they weren't going to be that much different. The actual plot, I think 35 edges it a bit, but because The Proposal was a carbon copy of this, it gets marked down a bit. So I still think this book is just a little bit better. It's a little bit fresher, especially if you read them in order. So this book just about edges it out. It doesn't have the same big moments that book 35 does. It's a bit bland. And if I went back and had to choose between those two, I'd probably read 35 over it. But I still can't get over the fact that 35 was basically a copy of this one. Hence why this one is just above book 35. Ranked number 43 is Megamorphs 4, Back to Before, with the really cool picture inset in there. This one is one that I was really looking forward to and one that fans really like, but I was rather let down when I came to reading it because there were no real big surprises. Once, like Megamorphs 1, it was just the authors taking an idea and saying, hey, let's just do that for the fun of it. That's all this book is. They thought, let's just see what happens if we make it so the Animorphs never go through the construction site. Never really adds anything to the story. It might add to the theory that Cassie is some sort of Elemist thing going on. So more on that in the future. Apart from that, yeah, we don't really learn anything new. It's fun. It is quite an entertaining read, but that's all it's really got going for it. Nothing too bad, but also nothing great. Ranked number 42 is Book 3, The Encounter, the first Tobias book. People would probably think I'd rank this one a bit higher, but it was the weakest of the first 5 books of the series, and I think more could have been done with it. The middle section is really good, with Tobias struggling to find out if he's a bird or a boy or whatever, but the start and finish were a bit of a disaster, especially the final bit with the massive ship. It wasn't great. Again, it's a relatively forgettable book. For one so early in the series, that's pretty disappointing. So it ranks mid-lower list. At number 41, the first Helmicron book, The Suspicion. Obviously, we've covered The Journey, which was the second Helmicron book, which should never have been produced. This one, on the other hand, was well placed. It comes on the back of a run of really heavy-hitting books, and this one just throws in something light-hearted and fun. It was a fun book at the time. The Helmicrons, of course, overstayed their welcome, but for the course of this book, it wasn't a bad little entry into the series. Yeah, it was just fun, not important, but fun. At number 40, the one where they decide to blow up an entire continent. It's book 18, The Decision. Some questionable decisions in this book. It was relatively entertaining, and we see the Lyrans again, but some of the stuff that the Animorphs do in here is very questionable, and this, for the amount that they do, the stakes aren't actually that high. There's some weird shenanigans going on with Zero Space, which is interesting, but there's little more that can be said about this book than that. Interesting. Rank number 39 is book 30. The Reunion. This is the one where they try to get Marco's mother, but she eventually falls into Yeerk's hands again at the end. And they find out that she's almost been outcasted by the Yeerks and she's wanted for basically screwing up the Earth invasion. There's a lot of stuff in this book about not getting too involved when there are things going on around you personally. And this is repeated very much in book 31, The Conspiracy. Marco is too involved in this to be making the decisions himself, and some of the decisions come back to haunt him. The best part in this book for me is the part where his actions result in the death of an innocent park ranger. He sees him just getting killed in front of him. A very good moment, but apart from that, there weren't really that many standout moments. It's a good book, but it's nothing great. At number 38 is the first in the David trilogy, The Discovery. It had some great moments in it, but also some very unrealistic and dodgy moments in it. The whole subplot of the big politician's banquet, which carries into book 21, just doesn't feel right. And also a massive alien brawl inside a child's bedroom doesn't sit right with me. It just doesn't feel realistic. It's a good book, but considering what's going on, it's nothing special when it should be. Nothing special when it should be. And that's why this book ranks lower than theoretically it could. Now to rank 37, and the first Jake book we find in this list. It is The Forgotten, the Amazon adventure. The good part about this book is seeing how Jake is operating at this stage as a leader, and that's why pretty much all of his books are of a good standard, because we're following this journey and it's a consistent character arc. But this is one of the more forgettable in Jake's line. There are some good moments of him being a leader, but by the end, a lot of this basically doesn't happen. This Amazon Adventures stuff, excuse me. And so left feeling a bit cheated. Not too much, but just a little bit. Good character development stuff in it, but overall it doesn't add much to the plot of the series. At 36 is a book that, according to recent polls, is the favourite Megamorphs book amongst the fans. Megamorphs 2 in the Time of Dinosaurs, the one which had like 6 different covers printed, for which I've gotten 2. This one was a really fun read. A really fun read. That's basically it. It was fun. It didn't play much into the plot, and there's some weird plot holes going on, like Tobias being unable to morph away his injuries, which was never looked into again and just was there entirely for plot convenience. And Rachel unable to put Tobias on a branch that was 2 meters off the ground. Just, I don't know what drugs the writer was on at the time. But apart from that, a very fun book. Really entertaining, really good stuff. Number 35, and a book that I consider to be somewhat underrated by the community, is the first Cassie book, The Secret. And I say it's the first Cassie book because really it's the first time we actually get a look into her character, because book 4, yeah, it was the first Cassie book, but we didn't really learn anything about her. This is the first time we really look into Cassie's weaknesses, and I think Catherine does a really good job of putting that into perspective with this book. The ending, though, with the whole grape juice or tomato juice thing, was a bit too silly. The whole ending to this book was a bit too silly with the whole skunk thing going on. But for the most part, it's a nice ride. I enjoyed it, and it was good and much needed character development for Cassie. Number 34 on my list is book 28, The Experiment, the book where Axe just quotes television shows for the whole book. It worked. I don't know how it worked. There's a whole thing about the Visser wanting to experiment on monkeys to see if they could find how to control somebody's consciousness or some rubbish like that, which was just a complete throwaway plot. And it is a filler book, but when it wants to be funny, it can be very funny, and it's another one of those light-hearted books. Maybe not as well placed as The Suspicion was, but it wasn't badly placed either. It was just a nice, fun read. At number 33 in the list is number 14, The Unknown. The thing that stuck out most to me about this book is the message, and the message was that there doesn't need to be a message. Go back to my review, it's been a long time, but I think I explain it better in my review. But I found this book intriguing for the message it was trying to get across, in the fact that they were looking into it too much when there really wasn't anything there. The whole Andalite toilet thing, they spent all this time worrying about something that turned out to be nothing. And there was the whole message about that going on. And the whole Captain Torelli thing at the end, going down the log flume, was fun. It's a good book. It is a good book. It's filler, yes, but I really did enjoy it.
Isn't that the book where Cassie pooped in front of everyone?
Yes, it is. And someday all horses will indeed be blue. We're now halfway through the book ranking. I'm just going to take this break just to shill things. So I hope you've enjoyed this ranking so far. If you're not already seething so much that your teeth blow out your face, I'm sorry if that's the case, but please remember, if you enjoy this content, if you enjoy Animorphs, there's a link to the Animorphs Discord, there's a link to Animorphs Top Trumps game, and there's also a link to the Animorphs Against Humanity game as well. There's all sorts of Animorphs stuff going on. I hope you're enjoying your new year, by the way. I've got the calendar reset to January now, so yeah, let's see what 2022 brings, and let's get back to the list. 32, you might not have expected this, but it's book 44, The Unexpected. And I didn't expect it to be as good as it turned out to be. I honestly thought, judging by rumour and how infamous it was in the series, that this would be a truly awful book. But actually, this book is quite important when it comes to Cassie's development and her ability to come out the other end of the war in one piece. I think this book gives us a glimpse into why that is the case. And at times, it felt like it went on too long. It didn't grasp me as much. And if it were able to do that a bit better, I think this book could rank a lot higher. But alas, it ranks mid-table. A really good book, just could have been a bit more gripping. Rank number 31, the book that preceded the one we just talked about. Book number 43, The Test. Biggest problem with this one, Taylor. I mentioned Taylor before. My least favourite character in the whole series. I really did not like the Taylor character. And of course she goes and ruins it. Apart from that, it's a really interesting book. We get some really interesting Cassie stuff where she decides not to go along with the mission. The big problem with this one, apart from Taylor, was the end, where I thought something had happened that was really, really interesting. And then the book decided, no, have some crappy storyline instead of the really interesting one it looked like we were giving you, which was really disappointing. But apart from that, it was a really strong entry, really interesting plot, and it was written really well. Coming in at number 30, probably ranks a lot lower on other people's list. Number 36, The Mutation, another Jake book. This one, a lot of people say, doesn't feel like an Animorphs book. I didn't get that impression. Of course, they're basically in Atlantis with this new alien race called the Nartex, but this is largely about Jake and how he interacts with other members of the group, particularly Cassie, and how his actions are motivated by her inner demon, Cassie. Very much a character-based one. If you take out the Nartex stuff, it's a really strong book. Even then, the Nartex stuff isn't that bad. It's nice to sometimes go visit new alien races. Usually. Yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised by this book. Strong, it utilised my favourite character in a way that I very much approved of. Yeah, ranked 30 and deservedly so. Number 29, The Predator. The one where Tobias finds out that he is Elfangor's son. Do we ever really hear about that again? No. Does it play into the series climax at all? No. And also the ending where Visser 3 knows that this is Elfangor's son sitting in front of him in a secluded office with no cameras, and he just lets him go. Apart from that, it was a really good book. It was just let down by those aspects. Yeah. Let down by some shit moments, The Predator, but apart from that, you're good. You're good. Ranking number 28 is Book 2, The Visitor. This was a really strong character one. It took the invasion, gave it a similar storyline, but made it much more personal. Gave us a real insight into how it affects the little people of the world. And by little, I mean your everyday person, you and I. How it affects families and children, parents, husbands and wives and what have you. Not too many big moments, not too many standout moments, but we do meet Fluffers McKitty, and just overall, it's a strong entry into the Animorphs series. Nothing standout, but strong. Number 27, Book 4, The Message, the one where we get Axe back. A few dodgy little scenes here and there, especially regarding the dome ship, where they just press a button and get in, which just seemed a bit silly. And the fact that it doesn't develop Cassie's character. She was given this book to narrate and her character was never developed in it. Getting Axe was great, but it's very much like The Visitor, where it's a strong entry into the series, but no real great moments. The thing that brings it above The Visitor is, of course, getting Axe, which was a very nice moment. So that's what pushes it a bit above The Visitor. Very similar standard of book. At number 26, speaking of consistent standard, Book 1. So books 1, 2 and 4 are basically the same standard in my opinion. And I suppose that makes sense. They just started, they're getting into the run of it. They don't produce anything spectacular, but also they're just starting, they're really motivated to get it going. The invasion is the one that starts it all off. It's the one where we get all the exposition. There are no real flaws to this book, I don't think, apart from #Keygate. But yeah, a strong early entry. You get the memorable moments, but I don't think memorable and standout are necessarily the same thing. But yeah, you do get probably the majority of memorable moments in this one, like Elfangor coming down, their first going into the Yerk pool. Yeah, Jake punching Marco. It's all in this book. Great book, but again, no real standouts. Just very memorable. Number 25, Visser. This is a very, very well written book. Really interesting. The politics going on. We see the Council of 13 for the first time. And it's just really interesting to see how Visser 1 came about coming to Earth and starting the whole invasion. The big problem with this, it never follows through with what it promises. the Darwin thing, where a gun was held to Darwin's head and it was either you die or Darwin gets shot or whatever. We never get either of those. One of you will be executed, this is one of three. Doesn't happen. So every time a big decision comes up, this book just falls flat on its face. If it weren't for that, this one would be really high in the series. It's just that that holding back, deciding, oh, actually, we're not going to make that decision. That's too much to handle. That lets this book down, but it's still a very entertaining, very high-ranking book. I just wish it had followed through with what it promised. 24, The Alien, the first Axe-narrated book. Quite similar to book 28, in that it was largely made up of Axe jokes, because Axe's character is two things. One, oh, do I like humans or andalites better? And two, oh, look at me, I'm very awkward in a human situation. That's basically Axe's character in a nutshell. Very much like mean Rachel, nice Rachel. You've got the two sides of Axe, and that's pretty much it. But this book makes good use of both of those aspects of Axe's personality, and we get quite an important plot point where he makes contact with the Andalites of elsewhere, and it also has the chili scene with Walter, Cassie's dad, which was a brilliant scene. Yeah, just a thoroughly entertaining book, makes full use of Axe's character, and I don't really think there's much wrong with it. Coming in at 23, the first ghost-written book, The Extreme, by Jeffrey Zulk, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was a thoroughly brilliant book. The only problem is, much like some of the other books, there are no standout moments, but it was consistent in how entertaining it was. Every part of this book kept me enthralled. I loved reading this book. If it were more integral to the plot, if more important stuff came along, I'd probably rank it higher. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's filler, because it puts the Animorphs in, funnily enough, an extreme environment that they haven't been in before, and just tests their abilities as a team. And I really enjoyed that. But yeah, nothing overly memorable about this book. Apart from that, really strong entry. At number 22, it's The Sacrifice, the final Axe book. Not really much in terms of Axe's development at this stage. In fact, his character development pretty much ended in book 8, his first book. Apart from that, very, very strong. You get the whole Yerk pool blowing up bit, one of the final big actions in this series, and it really takes full advantage. It does it really well, and there's some really heavy hitting scenes in this. Really big, powerful moments that are handled brilliantly by the author. Why doesn't it rank higher? I've already mentioned it. His character development by this point is confused, and they didn't really make anything of it and repeated his character development, and it was just a bit jarring. Apart from that, a triumphant read. Number 21, ranked 21, is book 31. Grandpa G's book, the one where Jake looks to kill his brother by the end. This was a major turning point for Jake, I feel, looking back at this book. Up to this point, it's all been about saving Tom, but this is the part where Tom is now no longer his priority, and this is the book, I believe, that changes it all. It gives him that perspective. It puts him in that position of something really personal is happening to me, so do I jump in myself or do I let other people take it on? And there's all that stuff going on. There's the German dagger stuff in the background with Grandpa G, and just Jake thinking about what his role is as a leader and whether he allows personal stuff to get in the way or the right thing to take place. A very interesting book, really no flaws in it, and just, yeah, a brilliant read. We're now into the top 20, and if you've been making note on what books come up, you might think that there are some obvious ones coming up and some not so obvious ones coming up. One of those, for example, at number 20, is book 34, The Prophecy, the one where the Animorphs take the trip to the Hork-Bajir home planet. Now, what really intrigued me about this one is that we finally got some closure to some of the loose ends in the Hork-Bajir Chronicles. We get to see Algeria again with the Ixilla, or whatever it is, with Quafaginavon. And I just really liked the storyline in this. A lot of people say that it's complete filler, and to an extent I agree, but with all that aside, the plot was very strong, the character interactions were great, And I just liked the fact that we got the closure to a real big question from the Like Chronicles, and it was also well placed in the series. Really isn't that much I think is wrong with the book. Perhaps one of the only things is when Cassie goes almost from one morph to the other. That was never really covered again, but that's a small minor flaw in what's otherwise a top book. And I will add on to that before I put it down. One of the reasons it ranks so high is that it's probably one of the most emotionally impactful books of the series. That's big points there. Number 19 is book 21, The Threat, the second of the David trilogy. Like I mentioned for book 7, the whole politician's banquet thing was a bit iffy at times. But the stuff aside from that in this book, where they start to suspect that David is not quite who they seem to think he is, was very, very good. But being in the middle section, we're also confused as an audience because we're trying to decide, oh, is David a turncoat or is he genuine in what he says? And when I look back at it, for a large part, it's a mix of both. He does things that are genuine at the time, but the animals don't see it as that. And because they don't trust him, then he suddenly becomes a turncoat because they don't trust him. And it's just a very interesting little dynamic going, and it comes mostly from this book. And I found it damnedly intriguing. A very good book, I think you'll find. Number 18, and the one that Pebble has been insisting that I read for years, the Elemis Chronicles. You wanted me to read this one a lot, didn't you?
Yeah, and you refused.
I didn't refuse, I was biding my time.
No, you weren't.
Yes, I was.
You're being stubborn.
I was being stubborn. Anyway, yeah, the Elemis Chronicles, grand sci-fi is all you can really say about this one. It's supplemental information as it comes to the series, but some really interesting stuff going on. And yeah, it is really just Catherine Applegate deciding, let's go full sci-fi. Let's go full sci-fi, and I think she actually really pulls it off. A really enthralling journey. Quite an emotional one as well when it wants to be. And it just introduces a lot of very interesting concepts to the series that I think are worthwhile. So yeah, I really like this one. Ranking number 17. I think one of the most important books, especially in the early stages of the series. Book number 16, The Warning. And I think it's very appropriately titled because this is the first time we really see the Animorphs becoming severely conflicted with some of the actions that they're taking or not taking. You've got the whole Joe Bob Finestra thing. You've got the kid at the end. I forget his internet pseudonym. But there was some really impactful stuff, especially towards the end of this book. Very important for Jake's leadership, because this is the book as well where he sort of finally embraces the fact that, yes, I am the leader. I'm going to have to make these decisions. A very, very important book, and I look back on it very fondly, and it's that fondness that ranks it so high in my list. I also think it's dramatically underrated. Certainly not filler for those that say it is. Ranking at 16 is book 6, The Capture. A very memorable book, some big memorable moments in this one. It's the one where Jake gets captured by Temrash, who was Tom's Yerk. And it's just a really, really fascinating read. And it was great to see the Animorphs operating without Jake at the helm at the end of the book and how they were successful in doing so, which makes me wonder why the Honda Jazz winning book wasn't a bit better than it turned out to be. But yeah, first time we've seen them without Jake the leader, working as a real team unit. And it was just so good to see what it was like to be a controller, and we get it in this book. There's no bad moments in this book from start to end. It is a solid book. Really good entry. Ranked at number 15. I do apologise that it's the wrong cover, but it's in this double book. Book number 53, The Answer. This is where it all came to a head. Jake's plan is awesome and ruthless. He sends Rachel off to a death that had been foreshadowed a long time before, and all the stakes are there. It's the highest it's been, and I just think it was played superbly. Catherine Applegate came back specifically for this and the last book, and I didn't think she let anybody down with this. It was an epic end. The only problem with this, and the reason it's not higher, is the Taxon subplot, which in the end didn't really need to happen. It was more of a plot convenience to get Jake and Tom to meet up. Apart from that, superbly done. At number 14 is book 22, The Solution, the last of the David trilogy. Very similar in standard to The Threat, which we've just recently covered. It's where they find out that David is a bit of a scumbag and they go after him and they finally defeat him with a pretty ingenious plot. But the thing that puts this above The Threat and a lot of other books is the scene in the hospital where they've just seen Sadler. And Jake confronts Rachel and says to her, I don't know how you're going to survive after this war. And he says a few things that are then brought back up again later on in book 48, The Return. This is the foreshadowing of Rachel's death. And I think it's played so well and so subtly as well. I just think it's absolutely delicious how it's done. And it's probably my favourite Animorphs book moment in the whole series. And it comes in this book, which is one of the reasons it ranks as high as it does. Ranked at number 13 is The Ultimate, the one with Cassie morphing the Great Horned Owl. This is one where they find the auxiliary Animorphs, and those are some really good scenes. And I like the characters that they introduce. The way they bring them into the fold is great as well. But the best part of this one is the very end with the blue box and Cassie's decisions to let Tom go with the morphing cube. That was really, really spot on how they did that. Apart from that, really good moments, top writing, and it's just another example of, I think it's Kimberly Morris. Let me just check. Yeah, Kimberly Morris. Always does great books, brilliant writer, and just really sucks you into the story for some great moments, great plot points, great plot twists, which leads into the end of the series. There really isn't that much wrong with The Ultimate. At number 12 is book 38, The Arrival, the one where we get those 4 pesky Andalites coming down and we have to decide, are they really good guys or bad guys? Turns out it's a bit of a mixture of both. But a large part of this book comes down to Jake's leadership and how he manipulates them to get his way, which I thought was beautifully done. All centres around Jake, even though he's not technically the narrator of this book. I just love it when we get a strong Jake book where he's playing his cards just right, and this is one of the best examples of that. It's also the book that where we learn that the Andalites aren't coming down, they're off with the Anati somewhere, and it really ups the stakes a little bit, just that little bit more as we slowly approach the end of the series. The only problem with this one, again, like some other books, I don't think there are absolute standout moments, but it's very strong consistently. It's up there consistent. It's a solid 10 out of 10 book. But yeah, it just needed a couple of those big moments to really push it further up the list. Sitting at number 11 on the list is book 10, The Android, the second marker book, where we're introduced to those double-crossing bastards, the Chi. This book was one of the first times where we didn't have Visser 3 coming in and messing things up. There was a great fight scene at the end. Every scene is fluid in how it... I'm trying to English, my dear. It's not working.
What?
I'm trying to make English stuff happen. It's not working. Yeah, The Andalite is very well written. And everything about it was great. You had some memorable moments in there, like that final scene. You had the whole Pemalite crystal going on. You go into the Chi hideout for the first time with the dogs everywhere. And it's just a really good, strong piece of sci-fi. And again, Marco is on top form. Really good book. So this is it. We're into the top 10 Animorphs books on my ranking. Which ones are missing? I'm hoping you're keeping up and you're starting to think, oh, where's he going to put this book? Where's he going to put that book? They're strong books from this point on. Some of you might disagree with that with some of these books, but I don't think many of you will disagree that this book is a top 10er. This is number 19, The Departure. The Departure. A brilliant Cassie book with where she meets Karen and Aftran. The start of the Yerk peace movement, and this is one where we really bring the nuance of the series in, where we start to find out that, hey, actually this isn't a pure black and white thing going on here with regards to the Yerks, and it's played really, really well. It was emotional, it was impactful, and it was high intensity as well. And so there are a lot of little plot twists in there. It was the full package, this book. From start to finish, it kept hold of you. And that's why it's 10 in my list. Number 9, the best of the Chronicles books, in my opinion, and judging from the channel's recent poll, your opinion as well, the Hork-Bajir Chronicles. The setting of the scene in the first few chapters of this book is the best that they've done it in the Animorphs series. Just the way that the planet is described, I don't think they've ever done it at any other point in the series. Just be so beautiful in how they describe this new world. It's emotionally impactful, much like book 34, which sort of sums up this book. And you're always asking the question of, what's Aldria going to do here? She's trying to make up her mind throughout this, and you're just constantly looking at her saying, what is she going to do here? The use of Dak Hammy as the only Hork-Bajir narrator we ever get in the series was really well done too, seeing how they live, but also we get a glimpse into Esplin's point of view and how he started on his rise. A brilliant sci-fi adventure, some absolute classic moments with them going into the mist, coming out with the monsters. Brilliant quotes as well, some of the best character quotes in the entire series. It's all found here in this book. That's why it's number 9 in my list. Number 8, The Attack, book 26, another Jake book. It's another one of those where it's just largely a sci-fi adventure. You're getting all these different sci-fi things coming in. I think the Howlers are a brilliant antagonist. A brilliant group of antagonists. It's somewhat parallel to the Chi. You get some Chi stuff thrown in there. There's a lot of mystery going on. There's an Elemis Chronicles thing. And honestly, you don't really know what's going on in the background. But what we're given with the Animorphs from their perspective is an absolute thrill ride. One of the most enthralling books in the series. Just constant action, pace, excitement, and character. A lot of times where you get a lot of action scenes, it lacks character. But this carries it all in one go in this one little book. Just thoroughly exciting from start to finish. And we also get Cassie and Jake's first kiss. I wonder how that panned out for the rest of the series. But anyway, yeah, really, really top book, and it ranks 8 in my list. This is where we start to get controversial. Number 7 in my list, The Return, the one with Rachel turning into Super Rachel on the front. You're looking at me.
That's the only one I've never read.
You've never read that one? You're missing out. This book was awesome. I was very confused after the first few chapters because I was wondering why there were so many dream sequences. But by the time it got to the end, it all just came together. This book is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Just, it finally brings Rachel back from the brink of being a dead-end character. Last time we got a good book from her was 22. And finally, we got a 10 out of 10 Rachel book. It just took everything about Rachel's characters and said, right, that's what her character is, that's where she is, and this is how she will end. This basically tells us how Rachel is going to finish this war. And it's done in such a subtle and poetic way. Who was the author for this one again? It says Lisa Hartgrader, but I'm pretty sure it was Kimberly Morris again. I think that this is the one where they screwed it up. But yeah, absolutely brilliant. And I was really taken by surprise in this one. It's just a fever dream of weird stuff going on, but it really works in its favour and brings out some really top moments. And I thoroughly enjoyed The Return, much more so than I expected to. And it was a brilliant end to Rachel's character arc, which for a long time I thought was dead and buried. This book managed somehow to bring it back. Ranked 7 on my list. Ranking number 6 is the final book of the series, number 54, The Beginning. It really rounds it off nicely. We get the very end of the war, and then we see the characters moving forward. And the atmosphere it set for me was just wonderful. Every part of this book, I was satisfied. And that's why it ranks so high, because it gave us the end of the series, and I was just satisfied, absolutely satisfied. It's not very often you get a series ending in a satisfactory way. Look at fucking Game of Thrones or something like that. Absolute tripe. But Animorphs did it, thanks to this book and the fact that I'm so satisfied. And not only was I satisfied, I'm saying that word a hell of a lot, not only that, but It was better than that. It was better than I expected. And it left everything open for future fan fictions, which loads of people have done. It left us with just enough questions. Just enough. Not too many, not too few. It left it just open-ended enough to keep that intrigue, but also feel like you've really, truly come to the end. A perfect balance in this book. And that's why it ranks so high for me. I love this book. Top 5 now, and this book used to be my favourite. It's the one on the wall, The Change, the one where Tobias gets his morphing power back. This book is probably the one I've always been most fond for and the one I have best memories of, which is probably why it ranks so high in the list. Looking back, the Tobias scenes aren't the greatest. They're really good, but they're certainly not the greatest. The Hawk-Bajir stuff, though, was fantastic. Some of my favourite parts of the entire series. Again, from start to finish, this book is absolutely excellent, and it's no wonder that it is so loved amongst the community. One of the most important books of the series, and it's handled exceptionally, and I just have such fond memories of it. That's why it's so high on my list. That's why it's number 5. Number 4 is book 5, The Predator. This one is just packed, absolutely jam-packed with memorable moments. You've got the ant scene, you've got the lobster scene, you've got Axe's first taste of food or what have you. You've got the Jessica scene, which was actually one of my favourite scenes from the whole book. God, what else have you got in there? You've got him seeing his mother for the first time. Every page of this book just seems to be filled with memorable moments. And it's all put together so well. It's not a jumble, it's not a mess, it fits. And it's almost perfect, this book. Almost perfect. What more can you say? But yeah, it's only 4th on this list. So it's obviously not that perfect. What's more perfect? Number 3 in my list has possibly one of my favourite ever moments in written fiction. And number 3 is Megamorphs 3. Elfangor's Secret, that big time-travelling one. And the other Megamorphs books haven't ranked that high. They've been fun, but they haven't really added to the series. This one, again, doesn't really add that much to the series, but I think this is peak Animorphs shenanigans. It is so goddamn entertaining. And some of the scenes in this, the scene that really comes out on top is when Jake gets shot in the head. Just out of nowhere, Jake gets shot in the head and dies. And I was blown up. Just as he was blown away, I was figuratively blown away by that. It was a phenomenal moment in the Animorphs series, and everything about this book is just breathtaking. If only it had been canon as well. But in a way, we wouldn't have gotten those moments if it was truly happening. Yeah, it's time matrix shenanigans and what have you. So it sort of does happen, sort of doesn't happen. But this book is just wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and it deserves its 3rd place ranking in this ranking list. Here we go, top 2. Which one's going to be first? Which one's going to be second? I'm hoping you know which ones are left. And they both are probably a big surprise to you. Number 2 is book 41, The Familiar. The one with Jake morphing older Jake on the front cover. Probably a big surprise to the vast majority of you, unless you've been watching my reviews. This book is so underrated. So underrated. Yeah, this stuff doesn't really happen. Nothing in this book truly happens, except for the first few scenes. This has, hands down, the best fight scene of the entire series, bar none. The first few chapters, the fight scene in there is phenomenal. And I'm not usually one for the fight scenes, but this was something special. And then we get Jake in this dream, but it's more than just a dream. And the decisions he makes play into what's going on in real life and foreshadows what he does in the future with the abort button, with Cassie. And the part where he's sitting in the office and all these zombie controllers are coming around him in this really weird, mystical sort of way. It was awesome. In every way, awesome, and it's so impactful without being impactful. It's so subtle, and I like that in my books. And it's got so many questions, and you've got to pick at it to find what fits where, why, and how. Love it. Absolutely love it. Love this book. But anyway, it's not my favourite. My favourite book. I've been thinking about this whole list. I've been deliberate in where I've placed every book. And there was no question where this was going. It was the first on the list. I was absolutely certain, and I didn't change my mind throughout this ranking process. And I only wish it wasn't sharing a double book, because I want to put it up there on its own. You guessed it, and you're probably very surprised. Book 47, The Resistance. One of the worst covers of the series, with the weirdly drawn photo Jake morphing into a beaver. But that really is the only problem with this book. This thing is beautiful. It's a piece of art. I think it was the only book that I actually put on the top of the shelf when I actually reviewed it. This thing is brilliant. A lot of people say, oh, the Isaiah Fitzhenry stuff, don't really like it, skip over it. It works so beautifully in parallel with what goes on with Jake in this book and going forward throughout the series. Everything about this book is purposeful. The metaphors that are thrown in there as well. I believe it's Ellen Giroux's last book. Played to her strengths, did it perfectly. From the very start, where the rain is settling over Jake's house and he's searching through his old stuff, finding like Grandpa G's stuff. Isaiah Fitzhenry being a parallel to the story with the Hawkbajir Valley, and the parallel of Jake fighting off Visithree's monster in the end with regard to abandoning Tom and changing his priorities. I dare say it's probably a flawless book in my opinion. I could probably find a couple of niggly bits here and there. If I went back to my review, I'd probably say, right, there's a little problem there, here. But that is my favourite of this series. And it's probably a big surprise to you, but something about it just really stuck with me. That is a fantastic book for a fantastic series. Going through this list, more than half of the books are 8 out of 10 plus. That's a big proportion. There's only 2 1 out of 10s and 2 2 out of 10s, including one old Animorphs book. The average for this series is high. And so, for the most part, it was difficult to place my top 10, but there was no question about this one. Absolutely love it. And that is the Animorphs series, all 64 books ranked. If you agree with me or if you disagree with me, please tell me so in the comments below. If you like this channel, subscribe and whatever, all that YouTube stuff. Remember to join me on the Animorphs Discord if you want to discuss my ranking or anything else about the Animorphs TV series. I really do hope you've enjoyed it, and I wish you a wonderful 2022. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Ta-ra.